Welcome to the AACS Daily News. Newly sworn-in Congressman Jake Auchincloss is set to begin his first term representing Attleboro and the rest of the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. We recently spoke with him and asked him about the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, where, during the congressional certification of the 2020 election results, protesters outside breached the building. In addition, we asked him about what he hopes to bring to the district during his term.
It was a dark day for democracy, and while we did not let the insurrectionist mob derail our constitutional responsibility to certify the Electoral College results, we did see on naked display white supremacy and the power of the Trump cult, and it was appalling. There can be no unity without justice, and there can be no justice without accountability. Our first call to action is to hold accountable and to bring to justice those who would incite insurrection against the American government. I was in lockdown in my office in Longworth. I had not yet been called to the House floor for a vote. Because of physical distancing requirements under COVID, we voted in waves on the floor. They hadn't called the first wave yet. So I was in lockdown in Longworth. I then went back to the House chamber after the lockdown was lifted and walked through a Capitol complex that was reminiscent of patrol bases in Afghanistan. It was covered with DC and Capitol and National Guards police officers in full combat regalia. And to see our citadel of democracy turned into a fortress was a grim spectacle. I was on the floor for the altercation between a Republican and Democratic member of Congress, walked through the Capitol rotunda and saw my colleague Andy Kim quietly, unglamorously cleaning up the trash and the detritus of the protests, and was able to see both in that fight on the House floor and in that work done by Andy Kim, two different threads of our calling right now. One, we must fight back against seditious conspiracy, against those who will say that this election was stolen or who will perpetuate a big lie about the legitimacy of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But we must also do the work. We must do the unglamorous work of governing, first and foremost in crushing this virus and letting the American people return to a normally functioning economy and society. The path forward for us is a path of moral leadership. One, we must remove Trump from office using impeachment, the 25th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, any and all mechanisms available under our lawful order to get him away from the nuclear codes, to defang his assault on our institutions, and to prevent him from holding office in the future because he's disqualified himself. We then must reemphasize the integrity of our institutions. And this is where I call on my colleagues from across the aisle to finally put country and constitution first, and to recognize that we hold free and fair elections in this country, and to stop this delegitimizing of our incoming president and vice president. Give them a chance to govern. And that leads to our third key plank of our way forward, and that is we must refocus on governing. This pandemic has gotten only worse. It threatens lives and livelihoods across the country and across the Massachusetts 4th. We need to put the full force of the federal government behind a vaccination program that inoculates 1 million people a day for the first 100 days of the Biden administration. I'll tell you that I haven't waited for me to be sworn in, much less for President Biden to be sworn in to get to work. The crisis is too great. I've spent my time since the election in November focusing on expanding access to COVID testing in the public schools in the district, pooled PCR testing used for surveillance purposes on a weekly basis in our public schools helps create the confidence and the transparency that students, teachers, administrators, parents need to resume as much in-person learning as is viable. And I am a strong advocate for getting as many kids as possible back to in-person learning because we cannot allow backsliding, and we cannot allow the inequity in educational opportunities to ossify over the next couple of years. This is really a moral as well as an economic imperative. So I'll be and have been hard at work on expanding access to COVID testing throughout my district. And I'll also be working on making sure we have an equitable and expeditious vaccine distribution program. Auchincloss.house.gov or jakeforma.com. Both will take you to sites where people can sign up and hear more from me in my newsletter and be invited to the Zoom town halls that we're doing. I just want to reinforce to my constituents that our path forward after this week is one, to remove Trump from office, two, to reemphasize the legitimacy of our institutions, and three, to get back to governing. And first and foremost, that means tackling this pandemic.